Okay, hello everyone. My name is Han Song Nian. In today's presentation, I will give a brief introduction about the relationship between software architecture and agile development. So let's go ahead. The first one, I want to ask a question. What is software architecture? Here you can see two different pictures. The first one is a small program written by people in the early days to calculate the area of a triangle. It is easy for people to write such a program, so there's no need for architecture. But the second picture is Android 4.4, which has more than 100 million lines of code. You can imagine that if there is no software architecture, people will not know where to start writing this system. So therefore, software architecture came into being. And here I list 4 steps of software development, of software architecture. This 4 steps is a simple version about the real software architecture. In real life, it is much more complicated than this 4 step. The first one is requirement analysis. In the initial phase of software architecture, conducting a detailed requirements analysis is crucial. This process typically includes functional requirements and non-functional requirements. About the functional requirements, we need to clarify the specific functionalities that system needs to implement, such as user management, data processing, and report generations. But about the non-functional requirements, such as analyzing performance requirements, security requirements, and availability requirements, these requirements are all we need to consider. The second step is define architectural style. After completing the requirements analysis, the next step is to choose an appropriate architectural style. This step includes evaluating different architectural patterns. We need to assessing patterns such as layered architecture, microwaves architecture, and event-driven architecture, etc. Based on the project's characteristics and requirements. Of course, we also need to consider the team capabilities. The third step is to determine major modules and components. Once the architectural style is established, the next step is to identify the major modules that components within the system. And this includes module division, dividing the system into multiple modules or components based on functional and non-functional requirements, with each module responsible for specific functionalities or services. We also need to define inter-module relationship, clarifying the relationship and interactions between the modules to ensure that they can work together simultaneously. The fourth step is to design module interfaces and create high-level design diagrams. After determining the modules and the components, the next step is to design the interfaces between modules and create a high-level design diagram. This step includes interface definition. We need to clearly identify interfaces for each module to ensure smooth communication and data exchange between the modules. And high-level design diagrams. We ought to create a high-level design diagram that illustrates the overall structure of the system and the relationship between modules, including data flow and control flow. This diagram can help our team members to quickly understand the system architecture. So after I introduce the software architecture, how it works in the agile development. As we all know, the product is produced through multiple iterations in agile development. The software architecture method is also applied differently in agile development. See, here are also 4 steps. The first one is iterative and incremental architectural design. As the project progresses, the architecture can be adjusted and optimized according to the changing requirements and technological advancements. This is a feature of the agile development. And second one is requirement-driven design. Because we have the user story, we can base the base architecture design on our user stories and functional requirements to ensure that each part of the architecture is closely related to the user needs. The third step is documentation and communication. Here is very important because team members should fully communicate with architect to ensure that everyone understands the software architecture, which this part I will mention later. The fourth part is feedback and a judgment. Collect the user feedback at the end of each iteration and to evaluate the architecture's performance in meeting user needs. Here is a role named the software architect in the agile development. So what does he need to do? Here I also list 4 works that the software architect need to do. But what I want to mention is the third one, team collaboration and support. Here, architects need to establish effective communication channels between different teams, such as development, testing, and operations, to ensure that the flow and sharing of information. Through regular meetings and discussions, architects can help team members understand the intentions and the principles of architecture design. They also need to conduct workshops, training sessions, and teach sharing events to impart architectural principles and best practice to team members, enhancing the overall technical capabilities of our team. Here, just like what I mentioned before, we need to ensure that everyone understands the software architecture. The next step can be worked. Here are 2 different types of architecture. The first is emergent architecture and the second is planned architecture. Here I will show the definition of the 2 different types. The first one refers to the texture that gradually formed through continuous iteration and feedback during the software development process. So it's obviously that in agile development, it is emergent architecture. And the third one is planned architecture, which is the architecture that is developed through detailed design and planning at the beginning of the project. I think this architecture will be used in the waterfall software development. Here is some feature about each architecture. About the emergent architecture, I think is flexibility. This architecture design can be judged based on the actual needs, based on the different iteration and the feedback from our user. And second way is incremental. The architecture evolves gradually rather than all at once, allowing the development team to make small improvements in each iteration. I think this is better. And planned architecture, it is stability. During the whole project implementation, the architecture design is relatively fixed, reducing the frequency of changes. And here is preliminary design. Its emphasis on the sufficient demand analysis and design that at the beginning of the project to ensure that the architecture can support the expected functions and performance. Here is a comparison between the different architecture. Okay, here is the last slide. Is a reference. Here I list 2 articles which help me to understand the software architecture a lot. So this is my presentation. Thank you for listening.